Gather around, everyone. I have a story to share with you, a tale of adventure, bravery, and triumph. It's a story that will take us on a journey to distant lands and introduce us to colorful characters who will test our heroes' mettle. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this epic adventure together. Tommy was just like any other 7-year-old boy. He loved playing with his toys, climbing trees, and exploring the world around him. But one day, something very special happened to Tommy that changed his life forever. As Tommy was lying in bed, he suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the corner of his room. He rubbed his eyes, sat up in bed and looked around, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, he heard the noise again, this time closer. "Who's there?" asked Tommy, his voice shaking a little. "It's me," said a small, squeaky voice. Tommy was so surprised that he fell out of bed. He rubbed his eyes again and looked around the room. There, sitting in the corner, was the most unusual creature he had ever seen. It was a tiny, green, and fuzzy creature with big round eyes and a big smile. "Who are you?" asked Tommy. "I'm your imaginary friend," said the creature. Tommy was shocked. He had always heard about imaginary friends, but he had never actually met one before. He was so excited that he jumped up and down on his bed. "You're really here," he exclaimed. "I can't believe it." "Yes, I'm here," said the imaginary friend. "And I'm here to be your friend and help you on all of your adventures." And with that, the adventures of Tommy and his imaginary friend began. From that day on, Tommy and his imaginary friend went on many exciting adventures, exploring new places, solving mysteries, and making new friends. The next day, Tommy and his imaginary friend decided to go on their first adventure together. They decided to explore the park that was near Tommy's house. As they entered the park, they saw all sorts of interesting sights and sounds. They saw children playing on the swings and the slide, birds chirping in the trees, and squirrels scurrying up and down the trunk of a tree. "This is so much fun," said Tommy, with a big grin on his face. His imaginary friend agreed. "I love exploring new places," he said. "It's always so exciting to see what we'll find next." As they continued walking through the park, they stumbled upon a small pond. They saw fish swimming in the water and ducks waddling along the shore. Tommy was fascinated by the fish and wanted to get a closer look. "Come on," he said to his imaginary friend. "Let's go see the fish." But as they approached the pond, they noticed that something was wrong. All of the fish were swimming frantically, as if they were trying to escape something. Tommy and his imaginary friend looked closer and saw that there was a big, mean-looking fish that was chasing the other fish. "We have to help them," said Tommy. "Right," said his imaginary friend. "Let's do this." Tommy and his imaginary friend came up with a plan to chase the mean fish away. They made a loud noise and splashed around in the water. The mean fish was so surprised that it quickly swam away. The other fish were so grateful that they thanked Tommy and his imaginary friend. They all swam happily together, and Tommy and his imaginary friend knew that they had made a difference. As they left the park, Tommy was beaming with pride. He knew that he and his imaginary friend would have many more adventures together, and he couldn't wait to see what they would find next. One day, Tommy and his imaginary friend were walking in the park when they stumbled upon a hidden path. They followed the path and found themselves in front of a mysterious old tree. "Wow," said Tommy. "What do you think is behind this tree?" His imaginary friend was just as curious. "Let's take a look," he said. They walked around the tree and saw a small door in the trunk. Tommy pushed the door open and they both peered inside. "Wow," said Tommy. "Look at this." They had found a secret clubhouse. There were books and toys scattered everywhere, and a small table and chairs in the corner. There was even a cozy little bed for them to rest on. "This is amazing," said Tommy. "I've always wanted a secret hideout like this." His imaginary friend was just as thrilled. "This is perfect for our adventures," he said. "We can come here whenever we want and plan all of our adventures." And so, Tommy and his imaginary friend made the secret clubhouse their own. They filled it with all sorts of interesting items, like maps and binoculars, and they spent many hours there, planning their next adventures. Whenever they needed a place to escape, they would come to their secret clubhouse and relax. They knew that they had found a special place that they could always call their own. One day, Tommy and his imaginary friend were in their secret clubhouse when they heard a strange noise. They looked outside and saw a beautiful rainbow in the sky. "Wow," said Tommy. "That's the most amazing rainbow I've ever seen." His imaginary friend agreed. "It's so beautiful," he said. "But do you notice anything strange about it?" Tommy looked closer and saw that there were 7 stones at the end of the rainbow, each one a different color. "Wow," he said. "What do you think those stones are for?" His imaginary friend had an idea. "I've heard a legend about the rainbow stones," he said. "They're said to have magical powers, and whoever collects all 7 will be granted a wish." Tommy was amazed. "Really?" he said. "We have to go find those stones." And so, Tommy and his imaginary friend set out on a quest to find the rainbow stones. They traveled far and wide, facing many challenges and overcoming many obstacles. They climbed mountains, crossed rivers, and braved dark forests, all in the pursuit of the rainbow stones. Finally, after many days of adventure, they had collected all 7 stones. As they held the stones in their hands, they made their wish. They wished for peace and happiness for everyone in the world, and with a flash of light, their wish was granted. Tommy and his imaginary friend returned home, proud of their accomplishment and the good they had done. They knew that their adventures were far from over, but they also knew that they had each other and the memories of their quest for the rainbow stones. One day, while playing in his room, Tommy heard a strange noise coming from his closet. He cautiously approached the closet and slowly opened the door. To his surprise, he found a tiny dragon hiding inside. The dragon looked up at Tommy with wide eyes and let out a small, scared whimper. Tommy was amazed. He had never seen a dragon before. He reached out to pet the dragon, but it backed away, frightened. "Don't be scared," said Tommy, trying to calm the dragon down. "I won't hurt you." His imaginary friend appeared by his side. "What do you have there?" he asked. "I found a dragon in my closet," said Tommy. "We have to help him." They spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do with the dragon. They couldn't just let it go, as it wouldn't be safe on its own. And they couldn't keep it in the closet forever. Finally, they came up with a plan. They would take the dragon on an adventure to find its home. They packed up some supplies and set out, with the dragon perched on Tommy's shoulder. It was a long journey, but they finally found the dragon's home in a remote mountain range. The dragon was overjoyed to be back with its family and thanked Tommy and his imaginary friend for their help. As they returned home, Tommy and his imaginary friend were proud of their accomplishment and the good they had done. They had made a new friend and helped to reunite a family. From that day forward, they knew that they could face any challenge together, and that they would always have each other's backs. Tommy and his imaginary friend were always looking for new adventures and challenges. So, when they heard about a magic show in town, they knew they had to go and see it. They arrived at the theater just as the show was starting. The magician, who was dressed in a glittering cape and top hat, took the stage and began his performance. He performed amazing tricks and illusions that left Tommy and his imaginary friend in awe. But as the show went on, they started to notice something strange. Every time the magician performed a trick, one of the props would disappear. Tommy and his imaginary friend looked at each other, realizing that they were dealing with a real-life magic thief. They decided to put their detective skills to the test and figure out who was behind the disappearing props. They followed clues and gathered evidence, working to solve the mystery. Just as the show was coming to an end, Tommy and his imaginary friend uncovered the culprit. It was the magician's assistant. He was using his magic tricks to steal props and sell them for profit. Tommy and his imaginary friend confronted the assistant and explained the evidence they had gathered. The assistant was taken away by the police, and the props were returned to their rightful owner. The magic show was saved, and the audience was once again amazed by the magician's incredible performance. Tommy and his imaginary friend were hailed as heroes and received a standing ovation. They left the theater feeling proud of what they had accomplished and grateful for the incredible adventure they had just experienced. They knew that they would never forget the magic show, and that they would always be ready for whatever new challenges lay ahead. Tommy and his imaginary friend were always up for a good mystery, so when they heard about a haunted house on the edge of town, they knew they had to investigate. The house was old and creepy, with broken windows and overgrown weeds surrounding it. As they approached the front door, they could hear strange noises coming from inside. Tommy and his imaginary friend cautiously entered the house, their hearts pounding with excitement. They made their way through the dark, musty rooms, encountering strange sights and sounds along the way. As they explored the house, they discovered that the noises were coming from a group of mischievous ghosts who were having a party in one of the rooms. The ghosts were friendly, and they welcomed Tommy and his imaginary friend to join in the fun. After playing with the ghosts for a while, Tommy and his imaginary friend learned that the house wasn't really haunted after all. It was just a misunderstanding caused by the noise from the ghostly party. They left the house with a new appreciation for the power of imagination and the importance of not jumping to conclusions. They also made some new ghostly friends, who promised to visit them again soon. As they walked back home, Tommy and his imaginary friend smiled at each other, grateful for the new adventure they had just experienced and the lessons they had learned. They knew that they would always be ready for whatever mystery lay ahead. Tommy and his imaginary friend had been through many exciting adventures together, but they knew that their greatest challenge was yet to come. They had received a message that a powerful evil was threatening their world, and it was up to them to stop it. They gathered their courage and set out on a journey to face the evil and save their world. They encountered many obstacles along the way, but they persevered, knowing that the fate of their world was at stake. Finally, they reached the evil's lair, a dark and foreboding castle surrounded by a moat of fire. Tommy and his imaginary friend steeled themselves for the final battle, knowing that they could not falter. The evil was more powerful than anything they had ever faced before, but Tommy and his imaginary friend were determined. They fought with all their might, using their courage, their wits, and their friendship to overcome the evil. In the end, they emerged victorious, and the evil was vanquished forever. Their world was saved, and peace was restored. Tommy and his imaginary friend were hailed as heroes, and they were celebrated throughout the land. They knew that they could never forget the lessons they had learned, and that they would always be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked back home, hand in hand, they smiled at each other, grateful for their friendship and for the incredible adventures they had shared. They knew that their bond would always be strong, and that they would always be there for each other, no matter what. Tommy and his imaginary friend had been through so many amazing adventures together, and they knew that their bond was unbreakable. They decided that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives exploring the world and having fun. They traveled to far-off lands, meeting new people and discovering new cultures. They went on grand adventures, exploring deep caves, climbing tall mountains, and discovering hidden treasures. As they grew older, Tommy and his imaginary friend remained as close as ever. They continued to have incredible adventures, and they always had each other to rely on. Years passed, and Tommy grew up to be a wise and kind man, known throughout the land for his bravery and his unwavering friendship. His imaginary friend remained by his side, always ready to lend a hand or offer a word of encouragement. One day, as Tommy was sitting in his rocking chair on his front porch, he realized that his imaginary friend was no longer by his side. He looked around, but his friend was nowhere to be found. Tommy felt a pang of sadness, but then he heard a voice in his head. "Tommy, my dear friend," the voice said. "I will always be with you, in your heart and in your mind. Our adventures may be over, but our friendship will last forever." Tommy smiled, tears in his eyes, and he knew that his imaginary friend was right. They would always be together, in spirit and in memory, forever bound by the incredible adventures they had shared. And so, Tommy lived the rest of his life filled with joy, always remembering the adventures he had had with his imaginary friend, and always cherishing the bond they had forged that would last a lifetime.